about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and welcome. Today we have as our guest economist Andy Sutton. Andy was formerly of the financial community. However, now he's involved solely for the purpose of blowing the whistle on corruption and helping people around the globe become their own advocates. Let's get him on the line right now. Okay, there you are. Andy, welcome to Liberty Talk Radio.
I think I just broke your camera.
Well, Andy, well, I'm glad that we finally got together once again. We've been doing this since it's going on 20 years back and forth, hasn't it?
Feels like it's been a long time.
Yeah, but I know since sometime in the early 2004 or something, 2003 era. Andy, we talked a little bit about the negative interest rates and stimulus that the administration is imposing on us. I'm sorry, I've studied this. It doesn't make any sense to me. Every time I finish reading, I say, well, I hear what they're saying, but I don't understand it. How we make money cheap and then negative interest rates, which gives me a headache when I say it, and then we expect that to bolster the economy, is well beyond my comprehension. Could you put me on a track to sanity, please?
Well, it's actually, I shouldn't say that. It's kind of simple. If you look at GDP, which is the economic output of the United States, and most countries measure the same way we do. All of the money that's being borrowed right now is going into GDP. So it's essentially masking as growth. It's kind of masquerading really as growth. So what happens if we start pulling out all this debt? We pull out $1 trillion at the federal level. We pull out almost another $1 trillion at the state level. We pull out all the consumer loans, all the mortgages, all the car loans, or even to be more realistic, let's just take the debt levels back to what they were in, say 1990 or even 1995. Even when you adjust them for today's dollars, you still end up with basically a depression that we've been in all of these years, but it doesn't look like one because we've been borrowing to spend. So GDP counts money that's spent. So and I did this with my students back at the beginning of the school year. I think I said this on the show before. You get two piles of goods. They're exactly the same. They're identical. And you buy yourself a Monopoly game. And you have an auction. And in the first auction, you hand out the 1s, 5s, 10s, and 20s. And you hold up the items, and the audience bids. You can do this with adults, too. It's a great way to explain monetary inflation. So, and then you have somebody keep track of what the prices are that are paid for the different items that are in your basket. And then you collect all the money. And by the way, you don't hand it out evenly. You just randomly, give one person gets more than another because that's how the world works. So then what you do is you get the 50s, the 100s, and the 500s, and you auction off the exact same basket of goods again, and you see what happens. So this year, our 1s, 5s, 10s, and 20s for our basket was $1,260. That was the total price that was paid for those goods. So that was the class GDP for that example. Then when I pulled all that money and passed out the 50s, the 100s, and the 500s, all of a sudden the class GDP went up to $15,500 for the exact same basket of goods. So the goods didn't change. They didn't buy more units. But if you measure GDP the way the G20 does, or the OECD, or whoever you're looking at, basically in today's world, GDP grew by over 1,000%. because it went from $1,260 to $15,500. We have economic growth. That's not growth. That's inflation. And that is what has been going on. They're not making more money to be able to buy more units. I mean, granted, people are getting raises, but what you're seeing here is the effects of inflation. This is why you need two breadwinners now. This is why that's not even enough. Now we need auto loans, consumer loans, a loan for the Stairmaster, a loan for the big screen TV, a loan for the side-by-side, whatever. Go right down the line. Loans for college. We need a big fat home mortgage. You have all this debt, and it's being played off as growth because of the way we tabulate and calculate GDP. So basically all this debt has been hiding the fact that growth has been relatively stagnant. Can debt create jobs? Sure. I'd go out right now, borrow $500,000 and hire some people and start doing something, right? Anybody can do that. But the problem is nobody ever looks at the other side of the transaction because it's not a once and done. You have to pay it back. And that's what people are looking at. And that is, I'm a big proponent that borrowing, there should be some accommodation for it when you're calculating GDP, because it's not a once and done deal. You have to pay it back. The car payment is due. The mortgage is due. The credit card bills due. All these different types of debt that we use. The government has to pay interest on the bonds. Corporations have to pay interest on the bonds. And then they have to repay the principal too at the end of the term. So you can't just, okay, it's a one-way in, it's all pluses, everything's fantastic, and just ignore the fact that, this is a reversible transaction. At some point, you have to take away from GDP to pay back all these loans. And that's what got the Europeans into trouble, 8-9 years ago now. They started their debt to GDP ratios started to get to 106, 107, 108%. All of a sudden, they're in trouble. So why are we different? Why do we get to play this game longer than anybody else? Because our currency is still used around the world as a reserve currency. That is changing, though. Every time you pick up the newspaper or listen to, some kind of broadcast, you're hearing about somebody cutting a deal to bypass SWIFT or to bypass the dollar or the petrodollar. It all falls under the same category. So $1 billion here, 10 billion there, 100 billion here. We're starting to get nicked with a lot of cuts. And what that does is it lowers demand for dollars overseas. So if countries go away from the dollar and start using something else, that lessens demand for the dollar overseas. Now we can't export our inflation. Now it starts to sit at home. Now we have to do something with it, Joe. So what do? We blow up another housing bubble. We take Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and we go and we start the subprime machine running all over again. That's exactly what's going on right now. 2005, 2006 is going on right now. Nobody's talking about it because everybody's worried about some circus in a small town, 500 miles from here, which I'm not even going to regard and reference because it's not worth it. The real discussion's right here.
Yeah.
What are we going to do about all the debt? What are we going to do to stop the accumulation of more? And I don't hear any policies being put forth that are going to address any of this. We're not even going to talk about it, in fact. That whole national debt, the whole debt ceiling, forget about it. It doesn't exist. Just spend it until it breaks. That seems to be the attitude that, when you're talking about academia, you're talking about policy think tanks, whatever the case is, that's what you're basically hearing is, well, we have modern monetary theory now. And because of that, we can't ever go broke because we issue our own currency. You read the paper that Graham and I put out last summer. There's nothing modern about this. This is a 114-year-old concept that somebody put into writing. There's nothing modern about it. I mean, it was modern in 1905, It certainly isn't modern now, but this is where this whole thing is coming together, and where the rubber's hitting the road. Now you're hearing about negative interest rates. So yeah, it's an issue. So how do we get to negative interest rates? Well, when we look at how the Fed sets the Fed funds rate, which is the overnight rate that banks charge each other for reserve loans, they don't actually name the rate. They set a target. And the way they try to hit the target is either by adding money into the system or pulling money out. So if they want to raise rates, they pull money out of the system. So it's a supply and demand dynamic. If they want to lower rates, they inject money into the system. They call it liquidity. So you'll hear the term liquidity injection, things along that line. So how much money do we have to inject to go negative? We know how much we have to put in to get it almost to zero. How much do we have to put in to make it negative? Or does it become a policy mandate where the Fed essentially pays or has its member banks pay each other for borrowing? That's what a negative rate is.
Right.
So guess what? People are asking me now, so when I get my Visa bill, there's not going to be an amount of interest charged anymore. They're going to pay me to borrow? No, time out. That's not how that's going to work. The banks, which are all the way down at 1%, 0.75%, give or take, that's going to be a near zero or a negative rate for them. You're not going to get that on your mortgage or your student loan or your car loan or any of that other kind of stuff. I'm a prime borrower. Every once in a while, I will solicit a credit card offer to try to find out, what the rates are looking like. 24% for me, for an 800 plus credit score from Walmart through their financial arm, Synchrony, I think it is. It's either Synchrony or Capital One. I think it might be Capital One now. 24% for a prime borrower. So you're not going to get a negative rate. I'm not going to get a negative rate. This is going to be basically a financial institution privilege, and they're still going to be able to charge, market rates to people who are borrowing. Now they've got the world. It's not just here. England, basically most of Europe, Australia, they've got all of these people hooked on debt. And so how do you stop that? It's not going to stop from the top. So they know they've got people hooked on debt, and people will pay whatever the interest is. And they can talk as much as they want about negative rates, but you're not going to get that. So it's actually pretty twisted when you think about it, because the average person's thinking, hey, this is going to be some great thing for me, and it's not.
Yeah. Well, I don't understand how such supposedly intelligent, well-schooled people with degrees that I've never even heard of, who are selected by other supposedly intelligent people to head the Federal Reserve, to work in the Federal, that none of these people are screaming bloody murder, saying this is not going to work in the long run. This may give us a little wiggle room, but it'll come back and bite us so badly we will bleed to death. And of course, they don't teach that in school. And what was it, Calvin Coolidge, during the greatest depression of 1920, 1921? I looked at the charts of the Great Depression of 1929 and compared it to the one of, I think, 1920, when Calvin Coolidge was in office. And it was a lot more severe, about 50% more severe in 1920 than it was in 1929. And apparently the reason why we don't talk about the 1920 depression is because what Calvin Coolidge did is he reduced Washington staff by 50%, right? And he eliminated nearly all of the restrictions on business. They said, you guys know how to make things, how to make money and bring the economy back. And it was only 18 months from the time that the depression hit of 1920 to the time that it well exceeded the top of the prior wave It took a year and a half. That's all it took, is a year and a half. And basically he eliminated all restrictions on everything, and everything fell into place. We did the exact opposite in 1929. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only person who's read some of the articles about, Calvin Coolidge and some others. The people in office are much more schooled than I am and ever will be, and much more well-read than I am as well. Don't these people, these people must know, and if they do know, then you have to conclude that they're all corrupt because they have their jobs, because they are falling in step with what the administration wants, as insane as it may be. Now, does that sound logical, or am I chasing ghosts here?
Yeah, one of the things that, and the Fed, when it was created, was given two mandates: price stability and maximum employment. So if you go back to 1913, when the establishment basically gave away Congress's constitutional duty to coin money and regulate the value thereof, they gave it to a private bank, and they gave it those two mandates. So they're to preserve the purchasing power of the dollar. That's price stability. 95% of the dollar's purchasing power since 1913 is gone. So that's been an epic failure. The maximum employment thing, and right now, honestly, we have fairly good employment, but the thing is, we've excessed for so long that it's hard to see what's real versus what's been borrowed, because there's so much borrowing going on to keep this thing moving that it really becomes a chore to separate out and figure out, okay, what do we really have? People have lost the idea of what capital formation is, that it's basically foregoing of consumption and saving and then making resulting investment. That's how capital is formed. It's not made by punching numbers on a keyboard and declaring yourself ready to go and do whatever. Oh, I'm now rich. I just hit 5 keys on my keyboard. I'm loaded. I'm a millionaire, Joe.
So we'll all be millionaires, whether we want to or not, huh?
Exactly. But honestly, most of the money today is digital. And that's how it happens. When the Fed wants to lower rates, they just go in, okay, we're going to inject some liquidity. So what are we going to do? We're going to create some money, and we're going to buy whatever. We're going to buy a bunch of bonds from such and such Wall Street bank. The bonds come into the Fed, blows up their balance sheet, the money goes out into the system. That's how they lower rates. So they manage supply and demand in equilibrium. So if you have constant demand and you start monkeying with the supply, you're going to get different price levels, and that's what they do. So that's when you hear them talking about, we're going to raise it by a quarter point, or we're going to cut it by a quarter point or a half point. That's a target. So that's how they basically move rates toward that target. What's been really worrisome to me is that, back in the day, when Lehman Brothers went under, and even before that, banks would go to the discount window if they couldn't get a loan from somebody else overnight. And that caused a lot of hysteria in the markets because there was a stigma attached with going to the discount window, as there should be, because basically it means that you've managed things very poorly, and now you basically need a mini bailout for a night or two. That's essentially what happens when you have to go to the discount window. So the Fed, basically, they got rid of the discount window. So we're not going to attach that stigma anymore. We're just we'll inject the liquidity.
Right.
And there's absolutely no transparency. So we're trying to figure things out, look at things, figure out, all right, what's real, what's not real. We can't even get accurate numbers. So how are you supposed to even go about trying to figure out what's real if you can't even get decent data?
But we do know that they're printing a heck of a lot of money. How come we haven't experienced hyperinflation? And especially now with Russia and other countries trading among themselves, bypassing the euro, the dollar as the exchange currency, and they're using their own currencies. And I just saw an article where Russia is increasing its gold reserves because it wants to shore up its currency so it can trade independent of the dollar with other countries and bypass the petrodollar altogether. And then the question is, well, with all of this, where's the hyperinflation?
Well, here's the thing, and give credit where credit's due. The people that run the financial system, for the most part, they have learned from their prior mistakes. What they've done they've channeled money to different places. So look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Look at the value of stocks. Look at the Wilshire 5000 index. Look at any of those big benchmarks, and you're going to see that those indexes are very close to all-time highs. A lot of the money that's been created and thrown around has gone into asset bubbles, like homes back in 2000, basically 3 to 6, 3 to 7, depending on where you were at. A lot of money went into real estate back in the day, and that's happening again. So if it goes into an asset bubble, that's good inflation. That's how the public views this. And I mean, honestly, if somebody came to my place and said, well, you paid X for this 9.5 years ago, we'll give you 2.5 times that. Well, that beats my cost of living increase. That'd be pretty cool. But I mean, if it goes into those things, then it's okay. If it goes into the price at the pump or the price at the grocery store or any of those, like the electric bill, stuff like that, then you see people starting to scream bloody murder, even though it's the same money. It's the same inflation. So by channeling it, they've actually bought themselves quite a bit of time. And we can do this for a while, and we'll probably have another roll up here at some point and lose 10 or 15,000 points off the Dow or something along those lines. And they'll blame whoever, probably the guy that had the 550 credit score and got the $300,000 mortgage. They'll blame that guy like they did last time. But that's where it's been going. And to get a hyperinflation, Joe, you have to have a wage price spiral. So if wages are stagnant, you can't have a hyperinflation. If you go back to really a textbook example of hyperinflation, which would be Weimar Germany, you had inflation occurring so quickly that people were getting paid twice a day, and they were getting raises in between because that's how fast prices were going up. So if their wages wouldn't have kept up, there would have been no way to support the price level.
Right.
So, and that's why I've been trying to, I've been talking a lot with my students about this. If we only have $15,500 in our financial system, you can't pay a price level that's double that for your basket of goods because there's not enough money to lubricate it.
Right.
So, and if you don't have your wages, if your wages are stagnant, the only way you can get more money is through debt. Right? So you're spending your wages.
And that's what we've been doing. Yeah. And that's the way we've been doing it.
So we've been borrowing this money, and that's been slowly pushing the price up of a lot of things that people buy, electronics a little bit here and there, clothing. It's been pushing the price of those things up some. And then people are saying, like, yeah, my paycheck doesn't go as far. Stop borrowing money. You're putting more money into the system to throw at this fixed quantity of goods, and you're pushing the price up. You're borrowing yourself into the poorhouse. 2 different ways. That's what people need to understand. If we could just knock off, even if we just knocked off the credit card spending and borrowing and just said, we're not going to do this anymore.
Yeah.
We're going to try and pay it down, but we're not going to accumulate anymore. That would do a lot to start fixing things a little bit. But here's the thing. It's now become basically a situation where it's in policymakers' best interests to keep this thing going. They're fully invested into this. They took the Keynesian model, which was deficit spending, at government levels. Anytime the economy shows signs of, a slowdown, we're just going to throw money into the system. Now it's to the point we say we have the greatest economy that America's ever had. Why is the government at the federal level still having to run $1 trillion deficit?
Right.
It's a lie. You can't have both. It's a lie. And I'll put that in front of anybody who wants to take it as a challenge. You can't have the greatest economy ever with record levels of debt. You can't call yourself the richest country in the world with record levels of debt.
All right, I want you to dust off your crystal ball for a second. All right, dust it off now. Get it nice and shiny. All right, tell me what's going to happen. I mean, to me, this whole thing it has to come to an end, because all we do. In fact, it was about 3 or 4 days ago. I always look at the debt clock because I'm an investor. I always want to know how much money's out there. I looked at the debt clock and I realized I looked at it about 6 hours ago, and it went up by $50 billion. I went, holy smoke, in 6 hours. And then about a few hours after that, it went up another $50 billion. I said, well, how is this money's going out, and yet people feel like their money is well spent because they can go now on Amazon and buy things inexpensively, or go to Walmart and buy things inexpensively, and they don't seem to feel it. But there's got to be a they call it come to Jesus meeting on this thing, where everything becomes, Mother Nature self-corrects things in a way, How do you see this thing playing out? Shouldn't it play out very poorly? It can't go on forever.
Well, it already is playing out very poorly, and markets always seek equilibrium, and that's one of the laws of economics. And you can violate these laws, but there's consequences. The longer you violate them, and the more you violate them,
right,
the longer and the higher the magnitude of the correction that you're going to feel. It's kind of like that equal and opposite force deal with Newton, if you want to put it into that kind of parlance. So 2008, 2000, 1987, they were huge speculative bubbles, all of them. Different things, different times. They all ended poorly, and they all ended with basically, the people in the middle getting their clocks cleaned. And if people are willing to take on subprime mortgages again, if we've forgotten what happened in just 11 years, yeah, it's not gonna end well. But here's the thing that I have to put with that. I don't believe that the end of this whole situation is imminent either. These people have proven themselves through guile and whatever, that they can push this thing around. And as long as they can keep the people of the world, remember, it's not just America, as long as they can keep the people of the world invested into the idea of it's okay to go into debt by 2, 3, 4, 5 times your salary level. It's really okay. You need to do that to succeed. As long as they can keep people in that mindset, this will continue to go on. As soon as they can't, then it's going to stop. It's a perception thing. Yeah. And I told the guys today, perception equals reality. So as long as we perceive that we're rich and we perceive that we have all this money, we'll be willing to continue to do these things, and we're just going to put ourselves further and further into the barrel. And that's like the take home from all of this, because if you get what's happened in the last decade, if you put it all into the span of a month, with just the changes that we've seen, people would notice, and they would notice big time. But since it's taken a decade, people don't notice it as much. It's been very gradual. The debt levels 10 years ago weren't near what they are now. I mean, just think of it this way. It took us 11 years. No, it's 199 years. I'm sorry. I can't even add tonight. 199 years to run up the first trillion in debt. And we've run up another 22 and change just since 1986. So we're on that curve. And what I'm not seeing is any concern really by policymakers. I don't hear any of these guys. And I see Neil Kashkari's out from under his rock again. He was farming somewhere a decade ago. Well, now he's the president of the Minneapolis Fed. I don't see any of these guys, saying there's a problem with any of this.
Right. That's the problem I have, is that everyone knowledgeable seems to be endorsing what is going on, but yet to the man on the street, I call myself the man on the street, who's not well educated in that regard, say there's something wrong. I mean, my parents had very low education, very, very low. My father came from the other side. He had to quit school to support his family, but started his own business, worked day and night. I mean, he understood this. I mean, he would say there's something wrong in Denmark here, But we have all these educated imbeciles, who are doing things that I've always learned to be incredibly destructive to any economic system. And it was taught in school that way, at least when I went to school back in 1820, and it was taught that way. And it seems that everyone is endorsing and basically cheerleaders for this new wave of insanity. I don't know what the heck to call it. But what is your prediction for next year? What do you think the economy will look like let's say six months to a year from now?
Well, I think what you're going to see is more deals to cut out the dollar. That's been going on easily for the last decade. It's really taken hold in the last 5 years. And you mentioned gold reserves in foreign countries. I don't think it'll happen in the next 6 months, but I think the eventual goal is for one or both of either Russia and or China, perhaps together, to do a gold-backed currency at some point and make a play to replace the dollar globally as a reserve.
Right.
If that does take place, and I happen to agree with Gerald Celente on this one, there will be a world war before that.
Yeah, because all those dollars have to come back. We have to cash them. They want to cash out. We can't cash out because we're cashing out ourselves. Anyway,
history's replete. There will be bad times when that takes place. And the chess pieces are being moved into position now. I don't know. I mean, my crystal ball's broken. I don't know. Honestly, I'm surprised that this has gone on as long as it has. There have been some pretty substantial disruptions. These liquidity injections, this whole negative interest rate thing now. Modern monetary theory, principles of that starting to pop up in different places. It looks like they're setting up for some kind of a remaneuvering or repositioning of sorts. And historically, again, those have been bad for the guy in the middle. So, anytime somebody starts talking about, well, we need to explore new monetary policy initiatives, hold on to your wallet.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
You're about to get ripped.
Yeah.
And that's what history teaches us about these kinds of things. So I would just say to people, try not to accumulate any more debt, just because of the fact that, first of all, you've got to pay it back. You're not going to get it by putting the extra money into the system. You're actually driving up the prices for yourself, which requires you to borrow more money. It's like a big snowball, and it kind of rolls and it rolls and it rolls and it starts to get bigger, and that's what we've been doing. Yeah. So this thing's been moving last decade. So the next 6 months, it's going to continue to get bigger. I don't hear any voices crying for fiscal reform, fiscal responsibility, or anything like that. So it's going to continue on this trajectory until
I guess we'll be forced into it when the other countries drop the dollar as the world's reserve currency. All the dollars come back, and then there'll be so many dollars floating out there that people don't want. It has to force us into a hyperinflation mode, or close to a hyperinflation mode, an inflationary mode, and then people will be more suspect of the dollar in the United States as well as outside the United States. That's what I fear, and then the rush is on. I know when I buy things today, all of a sudden I'm conscious, do I really need this thing? What if the what if happens, is this something I would want to have, or would I want to spend my money someplace else? I'm starting to think that way, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that regard, and people probably be a little bit more cautious. And with everyone hellaciously in debt, it ain't going to be a pretty place to be in. Anyway, we're well out of time. So why don't I'll give you the last 60 seconds to wrap things up, okay?
Well, first of all, I appreciate you having me back on. It's always a pleasure. We've been doing this. It's been a long time.
Yeah, for 15 years, I think.
Unfortunately, the blog has not seen an awful lot of updates. But the modern monetary theory piece, it is up there. It's a second post from the top now, and then I did a short audio to kind of fill in some blanks because I got a lot of questions through email. So if you go to andysutton.com, it'll redirect you to the blog, and you can read the paper. If you have questions on it, there's a contact form. You can email me, and I'll do my best to answer questions. I wish I had a better idea time-wise. I don't, and I don't want to commit to something.
I know.
Because then it's like, okay, now you're the kid who cried wolf, and it didn't happen. So now people say, oh, these guys must be off the mark. Maybe this whole thing is good after all. We'll just go further into it. So I don't want to set down a time because honestly, I don't know, and I think anybody else who's just looking at all the data and not having the benefit of some kind of inside knowledge on it, to be honest with you, I don't think they really can put a timeline on it either.
Right.
But I do appreciate you having me back here, and it's been fun again, as always.
Let's do this real soon, okay, Andy? Let's do it again real soon.
That sounds like a plan. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Andy.
Yep.
Good night. All right. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support. I'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments at libertytalkradio.com. My tongue is stuck to the top of my roof of my mouth, I think. Okay, until next time, stay well and do stay tuned.